Right now, we can't even go a couple of days without something Red Hat adjacent happening. But this time, it's not Red Hat directly. Instead, Fedora Linux is on the stand. Now, I don't want this video to become a flame fest. Instead, what I'm going to do is provide exactly what is happening and try to clear up some of the misinformation and misunderstandings being spread around. And then at the end of the video, then I'll provide my opinion. So, privacy-preserving telemetry for Fedora Workstation, with its current introduction planned for Fedora 40. Now, this is just a proposal. Nothing has been set in stone, and if you don't like this idea, right now is the time to voice your opinion. But please wait until you've gone through the proposal and know exactly what is happening. I know that any sort of telemetry is a really hot button issue in the Linux world, but just for a couple of minutes, put that keyboard down and let's go through it. This proposal, like every other proposal, was also shared on the Fedora mailing list. This is where much of the early discussion was taking place, but the main discussion is happening over on the Fedora forums. Fedora is an open source community project, and nobody's interested in violating user privacy. We do not want to collect data about individual users. We want to collect only aggregate user metrics that are actually needed to achieve specific Fedora improvement objectives and no more. We understand that if we violate our users' trust, then we won't have many users left. So if metrics collection is approved, we will need to be very careful to roll this out in a way that respects our users at all times. For example, we should not collect users' search queries because that would be creepy. At least they know not to repeat the Ubuntu Amazon lens. They will be implementing the Endless OS metric system. If you want to see the full details on how this works, I'll leave this blog post in the description down below. The one thing they won't be implementing is EOS-phone-home. This includes some things that don't really need to be there for Fedora. This includes a one-time activation message when the device first goes online, including the hardware vendor and model, say Dell Inc. and XPS 13, and the current OS version. This is data they may collect. The thing they don't need is the server performs a geo-IP lookup against an offline database, stores the country code, e.g. GB for Great Britain, and location rounded to the nearest 1 degree of latitude and longitude, then discards the IP address without logging it, and then the same thing is done every 24 hours. This country code data is not relevant to Fedora and will not be collected. Again, geo-IP data and 1 degree of latitude and longitude will not be collected. We can say we would never collect personally identifiable data and write software that really doesn't collect any such data, but this alone will never be enough to ensure user confidence. We will need a metrics collection policy that describes what sort of data may be collected by Fedora, anonymous and non-invasive, and what sort of data may not be collected. As this is currently a proposal, such a policy does not currently exist. We also want to ensure the Fedora community has ultimate control over which particular metrics are collected. One option is that each metric to be collected should be separately approved by FESCO. Collection of particular metrics in a particular data format is ultimately an engineering decision, and therefore FESCO seems like an appropriate approval point. Because FESCO members are elected regularly by the Fedora community, this also provides the community with ultimate control over metrics collection via the elections process, but other oversight and approval structures would work too. But what data are they considering collecting? To understand if Fedora Workstation is a premier development platform, things like which IDEs are most popular among our users, and which runtimes are used to create containers using Toolbox. To understand which GNOME Software Center banners are actually useful, we want to collect the click-through rate of the recommended software banners. It's also important to know which GNOME Software Center panels are actually useful, so collecting the click-through rate of those can also determine whether those should be removed or maybe consolidated into a more mega panel. It's also important to understand the kind of hardware that Fedora should be optimizing for. When they removed systemd read ahead, the mechanical hard drive boot performance drastically dropped. Ubuntu retained the implementation, but Fedora assumed that most people nowadays are probably booting off an SSD, but knowing whether the primary drive is an SSD or a mechanical hard drive would be incredibly valuable. Plus, if they want to do collaboration with hardware vendors such as Lenovo, things like a laptop model ID could be useful as well. For other Fedora teams like the localization team, knowing which locales are actually being used indicates which ones probably should be focused on. This is only a small sample of what we might want to know. No doubt other community members can think of many more interesting data points to collect, but note, the purpose of all of the above metrics is to inform specific design decisions, not to build tracking profiles. We only need to collect data in aggregate and have no need to associate the data we collect with particular users. But no matter what assurances they try to give you, transparency is absolutely crucial here. Since Fedora is open source, a developer can review the source code to verify exactly what it is doing and what data is being collected. But most Fedora users are not software developers. To retain user trust, we need an easy way for users to understand exactly what data we are collecting. We propose to maintain a documentation page showing the current metrics database schema so users can see exactly which fields are in the database and what example data looks like. But for those more advanced users, all components of the server discussed below are open source, and we will provide instructions on how to run a simple server yourself and view its metrics database. You can then redirect the metrics from Fedora's server over to your personal server. This allows you to go and validate any of the data yourself. Assuming the documentation and database schemas are clear and it is explained exactly what the data means, this is about as much as they can do besides not collecting the data. This is about as transparent as I could possibly expect anyone to be. Now, user control is where things get a little bit contentious, and there is a bit of misinformation going around because they did a really bad job at explaining this. Now, if editing Brodie is doing his job correctly, there should be a graphic on screen as I explain this. Local data collection and remote data uploading are two separate functions. Whilst going through the install process of Fedora, specifically the install process, local data collection is going to be enabled, but that data is not going to be uploaded anywhere. It is just going to exist on your system. But the toggle for data collection and data uploading is going to be enabled. No data is going to be uploaded until you go through the install process and go through the privacy policy. The privacy policy is going to list out the data that's being collected, and if you decide, okay, I don't want the data collected, you can then disable the toggle and nothing is going to be uploaded. If you go through the privacy policy and leave the toggle enabled, then remote data uploading is going to be enabled. This is to ensure the system is opt-out, not opt-in. This is essential because we know that opt-in metrics are not very useful. Few users would opt in, and these users would not be representative of Fedora users as a whole. We are not interested in opt-in metrics. And in a forum comment, the author says, I don't think it's worth implementing telemetry at all if it is opt-in rather than opt-out. Opt-in telemetry is basically garbage, and we don't want to be making development decisions with garbage data. We'll wind up collecting data only from our most hardcore Fedora fans who are not representative of typical users. If anybody is out there saying this is opt-in data collection, they are either misinformed or trying to misinform you. This is opt-out, not opt-in, with the exception of system upgrades. This is why I specified installing Fedora. If you are going from Fedora 39 to Fedora 40, the model is a little bit different. Local data collection is still going to be enabled by default, but data uploading is going to be opt-in, because we don't yet have a mechanism to ask the user to consent to data collection after a system upgrade like we do for new installations. Your upgraded system will collect metrics locally, but will never submit them to Fedora. This implies to me that the plan in the future is to have it work in line with the installation method, but right now that's not the case. But if you visit the privacy page in GNOME Control Center, then both collection and uploading will either be enabled or disabled depending on the user's selection. With all this going on, GDPR is a major talking point. Fedora Legal has determined that if we collect any personally identifiable data, the entire metric system must be opt-in. Since we are only interested in opt-out metrics due to the low value of opt-in metrics, we must accordingly never collect any personally identifiable data. We must also not collect any data that would become personally identifiable if combined with other data, which notably means IP addresses must not be stored. We only want to collect anonymous data anyway, but we need to be especially mindful of the possibility that combining two anonymous data points could result in the data no longer being anonymous. With that in mind, there are some dataset considerations. Additionally, each metric that we collect will be considered individual, non-correlatable data by default, unless approved to be correlated with particular other metrics via Fedora community process. That is, if a user submits two data points, we usually don't want the ability to know that these two data points were submitted by the same user. Each metric is stored in the database with a Unix timestamp indicating when it was generated on the client. If abused, this timestamp could allow correlation of data points that are collected at the same time as each other, or at a fixed time offset to other events. For example, if the system were designed to collect two metrics exactly 300 seconds after the system were booted, then just looking at the timestamps would be enough to determine that both metrics recorded at the same time were submitted by the same user. Accordingly, we should consider modifying the metric server to reduce timestamp granularity at least somewhat, so they fully understand that even with anonymized data, there are still things where you can possibly link it together based on the way the data is being collected. But that is not their intention. It is just an artifact of data collection. If you would like to voice your opinion on all of this, rationally of course, the Fedora forum is where you should be going. This is the main thread, but there's also further breakout threads to focus on individual topics. One on opt-in and opt-out, governance, decision-making, and Red Hat. At least there was, but they've privated it for some reason. There's further ones on what data is going to be collected, and another one on approaches to data handling. Whilst I tried my hardest to include the main points in this video, I would highly recommend that you go and read the proposal for yourself. There may have been something I missed, or maybe reading it yourself is going to give you a better understanding. For me, the post I made on Mastodon basically sums up my entire opinion. I implore any of the Fedora Linux contributors out there that might see this, please do not back the new telemetry proposal. I know telemetry can be incredibly valuable for improving the product offered by Fedora, and I'm sure some great improvements can be made with it, but I see this as your Amazon Lens moment. If Fedora Linux goes ahead with this, it doesn't matter that the user can opt out, it doesn't matter that the data is generic, it doesn't matter that it's anonymized. For now until the end of time, Fedora will be called a spyware distro. You will hurt community trust in the project far more than anything you'll gain from improving the software, and I really don't want to see that happen. But let me know your thoughts. As I said earlier, I don't want this to become a flame fest. There's already enough hate going around, so please just keep it civil. And that's going to be it for me. So if you like the video, go like the video. And if you really like the video and you want to become one of these amazing people over here, check out the Patreon, Scribes, the LiberaPay linked in the description down below. That's going to be it for me, and Fedora, stop trying to compete with Red Hat for bad press. Like this.